Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. All right. I can leave my earbuds in. Okay.
So we will go ahead and call the meeting to order at 7:02. Dr. Gaskins, if you could conduct our roll call for us, please.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis,
Here.
Mr. Stevens, Miss Davis,
Here.
Dr. Yeager,
Here.
Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Mr. Worthy,
Here.
Dr. Gant,
Here.
Dr. Knox,
Here.
and Dr. Maddox.
Here.
Thank you. We'll move forward with item number 2 to amend or adopt the agenda. The floor is open for motions.
I move that we adopt the agenda.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Davis and Mr. Worthy. Any questions or discussion around that? Okay. Dr. Gaskins, if you would conduct a roll call for us for all in favor of adopting the agenda.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
He's muted. I think that's his number that I see.
yep, I just heard him say yes.
Okay.
Miss Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman,
Yes.
Mr. Worthy,
Yes.
Dr. Gant,
Yes.
Dr. Knox,
Yes.
and Dr. Maddox.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So our agenda is before us. That's the motion that was just carried. Item number 3 is presentation and discussion of the revised 2020-2021 school calendar. Dr. Gaskins, I'll turn this portion over.
Yes, ma'am. I just need 1 second to.
Madam President, I thought the first thing was the superintendent's comments for school opening.
Okay, I'm sorry. Did I skip something?
It is the
I'm sorry.
presentation.
I'm sorry.
It's part of the presentation.
Oh, okay.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gant. So today we want to talk to you about our school reopening update as it relates to our school calendar. So our agenda for the presentation tonight is that we want to go over our COVID-19 updates. Those updates change every day. So we want to make sure that we are providing you all with the most recent information. We will review the process for our calendar options. We will also talk about how those calendar options will report our staff reporting as well as our professional learning moving forward. We have some defined next steps, and then of course we will open up for any questions or discussion. So at this time, we do have our Director of School Nursing, Amy Rourke, who will be joining us, and she will give us some updates of where we are in Athens, Clarke County and our surrounding area as it relates to COVID-19. Amy, Ms. Rourke, I will turn it over to you.
Good evening, Dr. Gant, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to briefly update you guys on what's going on locally here in Clarke County in regards to COVID-19. I did attend the Athens Clarke County Board of Health meeting last night. I do sit on that board representing the Clarke County School District. And I was going to share a few updates, information that I received from our local officials and Department of Public Health yesterday evening. Athens, Clarke County, and our overall Northeast Georgia Health region is in widespread transmission at this time. We have over 1,087 cases in Clarke County as of 3 p.m. today. That's updated information, which puts us at, if you want to talk about cases per 100,000, which is the best way to look at the level of spread in the district, puts us at about 837 cases per 100,000 people in our county. The Northeast Georgia Health District is comprised of 10 different counties. And over our 10 counties, we have 3,800 confirmed cases of COVID-19. They have 3 DPH testing locations currently, and next week they're adding a 4th site in Walton County. At this time, results are taking longer than anticipated due to the labs functioning at capacity. The testing, there are various types of testing out there, and I don't want to go too much into the weeds and the details of this, but the PCR test is the test that is being performed by the Department of Public Health. And that's the test that takes approximately 2 to 5 days to get results. Although they did confirm last night that some of the wait times for results are 12 to 14 days at this time. The antigen test, and I would like to clarify that that is different from the antibody test, but the antigen test is something that it gives a more rapid result. And we have a few different testing sites in Athens who are performing the antigen tests. What I learned last night that I did not know is that the antigen positive results are not included in our Clark County data by the Department of Public Health. There are various reasons for that, including the reliability of the test. That is a statewide Department of Public Health decision. It is not isolated here in Athens, Clark County, but what it does mean is that our cases are likely much higher than our numbers show, due to the fact that any facility in our region who is performing a rapid test or an antigen test, those results, those positives, are not counted in our daily count as according to the DPH. Currently, our region has 18 contact tracers working for public health. And one of the things that I have offered is for when our schools open back up, that the CCSD school nurses are trained by public health officials for contact tracing, and we do our own in-house Clark County school contact tracing. We are well set up and capable of performing contact tracing for our students and staff. So as we look at reopening the district, there are some health considerations that I have recommended to be taken into consideration. Mr. Gaskins mentioned at the last meeting that the task force decided that we had these 4 health non-negotiables, meaning we can't return face-to-face if we don't have 4 things in place. Number 1, we need supplies to clean and disinfect our school buildings. We cannot bring children and staff back into the buildings without the appropriate supplies. Number 2 is we need staff. We can't bring children back if we don't have the adequate staff available to support them. We also need PPE, and we need specific types of PPE for different types of employees based on their level of risk and exposure in the building. So without that PPE, it's not safe to return in person. And then number 4 was that we needed a clear plan, a clear decision tree as to how we're going to reopen, what we're going to do when somebody tests positive, or is this symptomatic with suspected COVID, or if we have exposures in our building. So the task force has been working hard to make sure that those 4 health non-negotiables are met before we reopen schools. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are aware that the Department of Public Health collaborated with the Department of Education and put forth some guidelines for K through 12 school reopening. These guidelines came out last month, and they talked about level of community spread. And they had a red zone and a yellow zone and a green zone. And many of you may be familiar with, this is the recommendation if a community is in the red zone, and this is the recommendation if it's in the yellow zone versus the green zone. The missing piece in that puzzle was, how do we determine which zone we are in? And we've reached out to public health about that, but we have not received specific guidance as to a rubric that determines which zone Athens Clark County is in based on our level of community spread. Well, a document was released by Fulton County early in the week that did share some rubric, and that rubric stated that a district with over 100 cases per 100,000 would be considered substantial spread. That was the qualifying cutoff to place somebody in the red zone. So over 100 cases per 100,000 people was an indicator that a district or community would have entered the red zone. Well, as you remember from the last slide, we are currently at 837.6 cases per 100,000. So well into the red zone. This Tuesday, the Department of Health revoked those guidelines that dealt with level of community spread, and they changed them to targeted exposure models. And I think one of the reasons that they did that is because our whole state is in the red zone essentially right now. Most of Georgia is over 100 cases per 100,000 people. And it's a very difficult decision to say we're going to open or close schools across the state. So they changed the guidelines, they removed the language level of community spread, and they changed it to targeted exposure models. Now, I have been down the rabbit hole with these guidelines all week. I can talk about them in my sleep perhaps, but I don't think that this meeting allows me the time to do so, but I have linked them here for the board to review. The first link is to the Georgia Insights overall guideline. And the second link specifically is to the district decision tree. And this is what has replaced the original red, yellow, and green level of community spread model. And what the district decision tree tells us is what to do when someone tests positive, what to do in a classroom, what to do if there's a symptomatic student or staff member in our building, and what to do with everybody who has been exposed. So it doesn't give specific guidance to us on whether we should open or close our schools, but it does offer some direction around if our schools are open, what to do if we have a positive case. One of the things that it does indicate is that it really depends on how students are grouped together during the day. So if for instance, just to draw a tangible reference for you, if there's a class of 10 children that are with one teacher all day long, and maybe they go to the cafeteria to get their lunch and bring it back to the classroom, but they don't mingle with other students in the hallways and they don't change classes. Well, if one of those students or staff member in that classroom tests positive, then that particular cohort would be sent home for 14 days, but the rest of the school could remain open. If a district does not group their students together in such a capacity that minimizes exposure, for instance, if we have children changing classes, interacting with different groups, then it's going to be very hard to close down a certain group. It would be more of a targeted school closure in that scenario. The good news in all of this is that the Clark County School District is working very closely with our local health authorities and our EPI team here in the Northeast Georgia district. So we are creating a small group task force that's myself and a few other Clark County School District employees who are going to work regularly with our local health authorities. So every time we do have a student or staff member test positive, we are gonna make decisions based on the guidance of our local DPH representatives. I've stressed to our task force that CCSD has a huge responsibility to our staff and to our students and families and our community members to open safely. Different from some of our surrounding counties, we have a high-risk community here in Athens. We have a lot of children who go home to households where grandparents live, and I feel that it is a responsibility of Clark County as a district to not put our community at an even greater risk than we have to. Most importantly though, I would just like to say that the task force and myself and everybody involved in this decision-making process recognizes the absolute importance of bringing students back face-to-face as soon as it's safely possible to do so. I think that the word safely is the operative in that sentence. And it's also impossible for us to mitigate all the risks. And I think that's a really important point to digest, that there's going to be risks no matter what our decision is. And there are health risks to bringing students and staff back into our buildings. And there are also risks to keeping our students at home. So it's been really a privilege to be a part of this task force. And I will continue to stay in touch with our local health authorities in our Athens-Clarke County level and also on the state level, and bring back information that will help guide the task force as they move forward with reopening.
Thank you, Amy. So as we continue with our presentation, we want to consider with really two areas of thought. One area is the safety of our staff, our students, our families, and our community members, as Amy stated, and the feedback that we've received from staff and students about the proposed date for returning to school. So as we transition to our calendars, we sent a survey to staff, we sent a survey to families around options for the start of school. So families had three options. Option one was an August 3rd through a May 20th date, which was our current start and end time. Option two was to push school back 2 weeks, which would start on August 17th. And that would include 166 instructional days. And then option three would be a start date after Labor Day, which would give us 155 instructional days. So as we polled our families, we saw that the majority of those that responded to the survey elected for a start date of September 8th. So we had 3,660 responses. The other information that we included in our survey is if a start date is delayed, will you be able to provide childcare for your children? You could see that about 90%, a little less than 90%, said that they could, and 8% said that they could not. And then there was a small percentage that fell into additional categories. So as we looked at the data very closely, there were some considerations that we made as it impacted our decision-making. So one very important piece of information that we wanted to show, that participation rates were high in some school communities and low in others. So although there was an overwhelming choice for September 8th, we do acknowledge that some communities were not, did not participate in that decision. We had low participation in our paper survey. This is a strategy that we've used in the past, and we had really good participation. The participation was low in the paper survey. And then we just wanted to acknowledge that 3,618 represents the number of respondents, but in that survey, there are respondents that have multiple students. So that number represents multiple students in multiple schools. We recognize that August 3rd was the second highest selection for the start of school, but we concluded that this date does not provide adequate time to train our staff in distance learning. And this date does not provide adequate time to provide our community with hotspots, address connectivity issues, and repair devices. Also, when we looked at the survey, this was before Amy's meeting, Ms. Rourke's meeting that she just talked about. And now we realize that August 3rd would be way too early to really ensure that we had all of those safety enhancements in place before we decided on an in-person or a universal remote instructional option. So what we concluded and what we are bringing forward to the board is that we recommend that the board approves the attached school calendar, which has a start date of Tuesday, September 8th for all students, which is the day after Labor Day. We presented this option along with other options to our principals, and they gave us feedback. and we summarize some of the pros, the cons, and the considerations that we want you all to consider in this delayed start date. So some of the pros is it allows schools to start later in the year, allowing time to adjust to the rising number of COVID-19 cases in Athens and surrounding areas. We met with principals on Monday to go over this, and the numbers continue to rise from that time until today, as Ms. Roark mentioned. We also wanted to allow time to assess the impact of UGA's return to school. Something that was important, that is a pro for us, that it maintains the same end date for students and families. So although we are pushing school back, we are not extending school into June or beyond. And we are happy that our school nutrition will still be able to extend summer meal service for all students. And this maintains the same 190 days for or more work calendars for staff. So this would not change the work calendars for the majority of our staff, which includes all of our teachers. Additional pros is that ACCA and Athens Technical College will adjust to the CCSD delivery model. We have an interim CEO, Dr. Lumpkin Barnett, that worked with Athens Tech this week, and they will adapt to whatever instructional model that we provide for our students. It also allows time for parents to select an instructional model for their students. We want to make sure that our parents are informed and they can ask multiple questions about those instructional models, and we don't want them to feel rushed when making that selection. It also allows additional time to prepare students and teachers for virtual learning. So there is a lot of work that needs to go into providing professional learning for our teachers to make this a great engaging process for our students, but there's also some professional learning that needs to happen for our students to be able to work virtually. And then this gives us additional time to select virtual teachers based on student needs. So we want to be really, really thoughtful about selecting those virtual teachers and make sure that it meets the diverse needs of our school populations. In our additional pros, and I will go a little more into this in a second, that it maintains all of our major breaks. So Thanksgiving break and winter break will be maintained, and it adjusts spring break to April to be aligned with other school districts in our area and state. So we would have a proposed spring break of April 2nd through April 9th, which would give us 10 days, including consecutive weekends. The reason that we adjusted our spring break, one, because we were starting school for students a month delayed. And the other reason is that we sent out a survey in the spring assessing students and families' opinion on our current spring break. So we asked 2 questions. The first question was, would you like for spring break to be aligned with UGA spring break? And you can see that 62% said they did not, and 37% said that they did. And that was with 2,000, a little over 2,000 responses. The other question we asked relating to spring break is, would you like spring break to be held later in spring, for example, early April? And we had 65% of those individuals say yes, that they would, and 34% to say no. So using that feedback is how we adjusted the proposed calendar that you have in front of you to vote on tonight. Some of the cons we see in delaying the start of school is that this creates a hardship to families needing childcare. So in a previous slide, we saw that it was 8% that may have difficulty with childcare, but still acknowledging that there were still some communities that are not represented in the survey. This also creates unbalanced semesters. Semester 1 will end in January. So we do not believe that is an issue for our elementary or our middle school students, but we do believe that that may be of concern for our high school students. It also eliminates the parent-teacher conference days. We feel like we have a plan to still connect virtually with our parents, but we wanted to acknowledge that we took out those conference days to allow more instructional days for our students. So workday calendars for staff that work 185 days or less will be modified, but not reduced. So there are some days that we will have to reallocate for our school nutrition, paraprofessionals, and school receptionists. We did not want them to lose any days or lose any money because we have modified the calendar. So we will work with HR to make sure that they have all of their working days. This also reduces the number of instructional days from 176 to 155. And then students enrolled in dual enrollment and Georgia virtual courses may be on a different schedule. So we do not have the flexibility around dual enrollment unless that dual enrollment is happening on our campus. And then those students that are electing for Georgia virtual, they have very specific days that they would need to follow. Some considerations to our decision that we wanted you all to be aware of is that if state testing is waived, schools gain back instructional days that are allotted for state testing. So working with our director of assessment, we on average have about 15 to 20 days devoted to testing or test preparation. So we felt that we would get those days back to use for instruction. We also believe that less frequent breaks and eliminating early release days support uninterrupted learning. And a later start date provides adequate time for teachers and school leaders to develop digital content for students if a school shutdown is implemented due to increased COVID cases. So with this extended time, we will be planning for all instructional models, but we still need to be realistic that we may have an entire school shutdown as we did in March, and we just want to be ready for that in case that happens. When we were thinking about what would the impact be and what are some things that we could get students ready for school, even with the delayed start, is that we could really use 2 weeks prior to the start of school to be used as a jump start to school. So beginning around August 17th, we can focus on internet and device connectivity and device deployment. We can provide virtual open houses so families can meet teachers and staff. We have considered a first day of school campaign, so a video campaign to help students and families adjust to the safety enhancements of how you get off the bus, how you get on the bus, how you enter school, how you enter the calendar. We felt that that would be very important to go over those things and those videos to our website before students started on the first day. We also want a registration campaign to increase the number of students registered prior to the first day of school. That is always a concern that we have, and we really think that having all teachers back can really encourage families and those rising kindergarten students to register early rather than later for school. And then particularly at our secondary schools, this gives additional scheduling time to make adjustments for students based on some feedback from their families. So based on our recommendation, this does impact staff reporting. So staff will begin reporting either virtually or in person, or on their corresponding contracted starting date. So we would not change the starting date for teachers or other staff. So our starting date for teachers is July 27th. We would keep that date for July 27th and then work with teachers on a variety of things that I will present in just one second. So with our staff reporting early, we have a couple of different topics that we want to be able to go over with our staff. So one of those topics is the health, safety, and wellness of our staff and students. We want to make sure that we're providing professional development around those key buckets. Something else that we have to acknowledge is that we have to ensure that we have allotted social emotional learning lessons for our students and that we provide professional learning for our teachers to teach those lessons. We also want to acknowledge that there is staff and student support that will be needed. So we have staff that need some support around being at home since March and those things that come with being at home and isolated from their colleagues, as well as students. One of our big buckets that we want to focus on is instructional planning. So we want to talk about our core curriculum and how we provide professional development for that. We need to plan for digital distance learning as well as universal remote learning if there is a school shutdown, and then continue with our work around professional learning communities that we've trained our principals in June, and that we want to continue to roll out with our staffs when we return to school. Let me unshare for 1 second. I think I am sharing maybe the PowerPoint that I went over with our principals, and that's a little different than what I planned on going over with us. Let me just make sure I have the right one. I apologize. Okay, something that we wanted to dig into as it related to preparing our teachers and what we would do in August is one thing that we're going to do is identify model teachers and instructional coaches that will create content for all schools utilizing core and supplemental resources. So in that time, we will have the best of our best teachers and instructional coaches helping create what that content is that students will learn from home in a digital environment. Core teachers and instructional coaches will work on cross-district teams to ensure that all students receive rigorous instruction aligned to district and state curriculum expectations. So we really want to make sure that it doesn't matter what school a student is attending, that they are receiving the same core instruction that is aligned to state standards. We want to pay an additional stipend to those teachers and instructional coach for content development because we realize that it is additional work that they will be tasked with doing. And we know that they're going to create really nice products, and we want to compensate that for them. And then we're going to lean on our principals to recommend those teachers. So we have a really good core group of teachers that can provide great lessons for distance and digital learning. So these are some next steps that we want to you to consider. So we are meeting with executive staff in the morning to share the additional guidance that Amy presented to us today. On Wednesday of next week, well, I'm sorry, let me go back just one point. Our purpose of going over the additional guidance with the principals is we want principals to start thinking about what are the best instructional options for our students based on this update that Amy gave us. So we shared last week some of our instructional options, and we believe that some of those instructional options may change. As you are aware, in the metro area, some of those schools have systems have started totally virtually. And in some schools in our RESA and surrounding areas have only provided one option, which is face-to-face. So we really want to share the updates with our principals and have them think about what is the best option that supports our students academically, given this additional information. So on Wednesday next week, we want to announce our instructional options for students. So we want to provide additional details to families regarding distance digital learning with a new due date for virtual learning registration. We need to revise our professional learning calendar with principals and instructional coaches. We want to make sure that our teachers feel well equipped on September 8th, which is our recommendation for a school start date, with all of the professional learning that they will need to change their in-person instruction to instruction that includes digital learning. And then we want to submit and recruit model teachers to begin the distance and digital learning planning. Also, in our next steps, we want to solicit feedback from key groups. So one thing that we would like to do is after we have developed our instructional models is have town hall virtual meetings where people can ask questions and make suggestions so we can make sure that we have not missed any blind spots in our planning. We also will engage our teacher advisory board, our parent advisory board to give us feedback on those plans, and we will work with our LSGT representatives in small group sessions to give us feedback. We will also utilize our directors in our central office so they can meet with their bus drivers, school nutrition workers, and centralized staff, just so we are aware of their needs as well to make sure that this plan is meeting their needs. Our plan at our next Board of Education meeting, which is on August 6th, to have our updated reopening plan based on the feedback that we get from these groups, and then finalizing that plan. So that is our presentation for tonight. And of course, we are open to any questions or feedback that you have.
Yeah, Mr. Gaskin. Mr. Gaskin?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You can hear me. Okay. I had a question, but I'm just going to make this a comment now. And I think you've already mentioned how you all would handle this through social emotional learning. Because when I was a high school principal, I had two situations where a disease, hepatitis, happened. And when something like that happens now, obviously students are going to be concerned, parents are going to be concerned, and you're going to get an outcry. And it's just going to go viral on you. But I think what you said, through social emotional learning, that's how you are going to handle that. Am I correct on that?
Yes, sir. We have teachers and our counselors that teach social emotional lessons currently. We want to make sure that those social emotional learning lessons are relevant to what our students and our teachers and our families are going through right now on the pandemic.
Okay, well, that's good, because chances are it's going to happen. You know, as I stated, it happened to me as a principal, but you know, obviously we didn't have a plan, but we had to come up with one quickly, you know, to keep students in line, and also parents. But anyway, I think that's good. I just want to make a comment. I had a question on that, but you've already handled that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Worthing.
So I have a question, Mr. Gaskins.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that you would eliminate parent-teacher conference days. How is that communication going to work? What replaces that consultation on a scheduled basis with parents in terms of a student's progress?
Yes, ma'am. So in our instructional option, we are suggesting that Monday through Thursday be in person, and Friday are days when students are all in digital learning. We believe that we can do parent-teacher conferences virtually on those Fridays in first semester. And then we are currently working on a plan of how we update the progress to parents in the second semester.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Gaskins.
Yes, sir.
A couple of questions or comments that I had gotten from people that have been calling me, staff. When we bring the staff back, we'll be able to, this may be a financial question, but will we be able to provide childcare to that staff?
That we are talking about at our cabinet level, Mr. Davis. Part of our response is the liability concerns around having our schools used as childcare. As I'm imagining you saying, when their parents come to work, they come to work with their parents.
Right.
So that is something that we are equally concerned about. Lawrence Harris is working with 3 of our community partners to see if they can provide some options for our staff as it relates to childcare. So I believe that one of those partners, and Mr. Harris, please correct me if I'm wrong, is the Boys and Girls Club. That may be an option for our staff. That has not been, I think, finalized yet, but we acknowledge that concern and want to find some options for our staff.
Okay, if I can kind of ask another question that may be a budgetary item. Last week we talked about, and you referred to it also in terms of knowing that our parents may need assistance in terms of connectivity if they opt for a virtual or partially virtual environment for their children. Has the staff numbers been looked at, and is there under consideration the hiring of more technical staff that could work specifically with families on that connectivity piece?
We think that we may be able to do that in a budget neutral way, Mr. Davis. We're going to have to think about how we use our staff differently to help with connectivity. We have not considered adding another budget item about hiring more people. We've thought about how we could modify or how we could change up people's work duties and responsibilities so we are meeting those needs.
Okay. There's two other comments, if I can make them real quickly, and this is just things that have been people talk to me about. One is that when we talk about virtual learning from with teaching, virtual teaching, a couple of teachers have talked to me about wanting to do it in their classrooms because all their items are there. Now, we didn't have that forethought when we had to shut down schools quickly. But if that's being considered, and also in terms of in terms of the protocols of how students and staff are interacting with each other, is that going to be a real school level or the school? Is a lot of that going to be school level decision making?
So that will be a district level decision with feedback from schools, Mr. Davis. When I was presenting, I realized I included that staff information in my presentation, and that has changed since we talked about it with principals on Monday, because what we would like is for teachers to be able to have access to their classrooms, to their classroom materials, to really be able to provide our students with as close to in-classroom instruction as possible. However, those safety concerns that Amy, Ms. Rohrig mentioned, it's still a concern of ours. So of course we want teachers to be able to be in the most comfortable environment, but we have to consider what those safety concerns are. So we have to have our principals in our meeting tomorrow. We'll talk about that with our principals and have our principals give us a recommendation when they meet as a level on Monday.
Mr. Gaskins, you've got lots of questions in the chat. You want me to help?
Okay. Yes, please.
I think, Dr. Yeager, did that answer your question, your first one about the presentation? That the slide I think that you saw has changed.
Yeah, I just wondered why you skipped over the staff information. I'm sure we have lots of concerned staff watching this video, and they probably wondered why you skipped over that.
So we met earlier this week, and we talked about a hybrid reporting schedule for our staff, which would have our staff come in 2 days per week, and then everyone would work from home on Friday. We need to get some additional feedback from our principals, as well as some of the recommendations that Amy made. Does that change from a virtual hybrid option to a total work from home option? Okay. Based on that new information? We do not foresee our staff coming back 5 days per week. During this extended planning, it would either be a hybrid or it would be a total virtual environment.
Next question, is a single calendar required for all grades? I'm wondering if high schoolers could start sooner, perhaps virtually.
So that is something that we could consider. However, I believe our high school teachers still need that ramp up time to prepare for virtual learning.
I think their questioning is concerning around the uneven semesters and the switching to block, if that is a good idea, if we need to postpone switching to block.
We receive feedback from our principals around block. We actually think that block supports us in the semester, the school year being delayed, as well as students would only take 4 classes on a block in a potential virtual environment compared to 6 classes. And then that aligns with what ACCA is doing. ACCA is already on a block schedule, and also Athens Tech is on a block schedule.
Mr. Gaskell, let me piggyback on that for a minute. I was happy to hear you say that you are going to go forward with the 4x4 block. And simply because of the fact you're talking about, what, 90 minutes per class?
We would actually, Mr. Worthy, a block schedule is 90 minutes per class. We talked with our high school principals this morning to talk about how we could be more flexible with that time if students needed more time. Just because we are losing instructional days, they may need some additional time to do 2 classes per day, opposed to 4 classes per day.
The reason I brought that up and wanted to give some input on that, because with a 4x4 block schedule, 4 classes per day, 90 minutes per class, and you're saying there's a possibility that you are going to extend that, that's less time in the hall in terms of students mingling and mixing. So I think I see that as a positive.
Go ahead, Dr. Yeager.
Can I follow up on, so I'm kind of concerned for the upper level high school students who are taking either, well, APs or even just content. It's hard to cram all the content for a whole class into the shortened semester. And so how are those kids going to get what they need in a very, very much shortened semester? Because it's not like they're taking it over the whole year and the whole year can absorb those 20 days. It's just the semester has to absorb those 20 days. So if you're taking a chemistry class, that's your only chemistry class you're going to get. And they don't have 2 semesters, they have 1, right? That's how block works. You're not getting a year's worth of information in a semester because it's a longer day, but you're also now shortening. It's just that the kids that are taking classes this fall in high school are really going to get a shortened curriculum if we continue with block.
Yes, ma'am. Our high school principals brought that up, and that's part of our considerations around how we are doing our scheduling. So Mr. Derricott, who is the principal at Cedar Shoals, mentioned that they would be working to ensure that those AP classes were given in the spring semester and not in the fall semester. And so that's why we would need that additional time for scheduling to make those adjustments for our students.
So there would be no AP classes offered in the fall.
I'm not saying that there won't be any AP classes offered in the fall. What I'm saying is that Mr. Derricott said that there are some classes that are offered in the fall that they think that they need to move. So there are some AP classes, for example, in AP biology or AP chemistry, that you will need as much time as possible. And then there's some other AP classes such as AP human anatomy or geography that, based on the high school principal's recommendation, that may stay in that fall semester based on previous passing rates for those students where they feel that it doesn't need to be changed.
Okay, the next question, can you or Ms. Hill address special education, please? We're getting lots of concerned parents around the IEPs.
Right, so Dr. Knox, we got your the email about the link not working. So we are working to address that. So Heidi Hill, our Executive Director of Special Ed, has worked with our attorney, Andrea Jolliffe, about creating an FAQ. So a survey went out to families today around the instructional model and the needs of their student, and an FAQ is going out on Monday. That FAQ is pretty extensive, and our board attorney said it is in line with what needs to happen for our students. Ms. Hill is on the call now. So Ms. Hill, is there any other thing that you would want to suggest?
I do apologize for the, there was one button that was not clicked on the survey. I apologize. That was fixed within 15 minutes of being notified. So, and I have confirmed with parents that that has been resolved. So again, I do apologize for that. We are looking forward to receiving the feedback from our parents of students with disabilities to help then individualize the plan that the district is putting forth for all students, but individualize the plan for our students with special needs. As Mr. Gaskins referenced, it is, we've taken all of the questions, quite frankly, that we've been receiving from parents and have ensured that answers to those questions, and quite a few in addition, are included in the frequently asked questions document. It's about, I think it's 4 pages long. And so we have tried to be very explicit and provided extensive answers to those questions.
Okay. The next question, why are we not pulling back holidays to help accommodate the loss of 21 days?
So I think pulling back holidays is very difficult. We don't know if people will be able to travel or take advantage, but sometimes people plan ahead of time for those major holidays. So we thought that it would be important to maintain those holidays. And we felt that the fact that our state superintendent is requesting a waiver in state testing, that we would get those days back by not having to take an EOC or an EOG.
I mean, nobody's going to go visit grandma over Thanksgiving if we're in a pandemic. So I would definitely encourage you to pull back at least Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as a way to get 3 more days. And we have a fall break. We're not going to Florida this year. You know, people's travel plans are completely destroyed. So accommodating those travel plans, I don't think is high priority. And you've already moved spring break. So everybody that planned for their cruise in March or whenever it was supposed to be, those have to move. I guess I'm just not convinced. We need vacation time and we're losing so many days. I'm really concerned about the high school kids.
Okay. Next question, where are we at with establishing an LMS for teachers to share content with students?
So we currently use Google Classroom to share content with students. So our Google Suite provides the same capabilities as an LMS. That did come up in our task force meeting today or earlier this week, I can't remember. So I am looking at some additional LMS options. I am trying to find an option that goes above and beyond what Google Classroom and our Google Suite does to just make sure there is a need to purchase that. Something that we did in March is that my team, we took the Google Educator Certification course. So we are aware of all of the capabilities of Google Classroom. We're going to provide options for that course for our teachers when they come back, because I think part of it is there are so many things that Google Classroom can do and so many things that the Google Suite can do. I think learning those capabilities before buying an additional system might be helpful. But if it is not helpful and we do find an LMS that works better than our Google Suite, that is something that we can use our CARES money and we can purchase.
Okay.
Again, concerns about high schools and uneven semesters. More students may choose GAVs. Do we have more GAV slots?
So we have GAV slots. GAVs is about $1,400 per student. If we have a large number of students that would like to register for GAVs, then we would have to consider budgeting for those students. When we sent out our options for the hybrid option or the totally digital option or the GAVs option, there were very few students. I cannot remember the percentage, but there were very few students that chose GAVs. It was around the same number that chooses GAVs now, which is about 40 students here or there that takes 1 or more classes. And GAV
Yep.
stands for the Georgia Virtual School.
But that also was before we took off a month of content from the kids. So I can imagine the parents will now urge their children to do GABs to get the full course. Just a guess. I mean, I'm just speaking personal experience. My kids said no way to GABs when they were given the choice at the beginning, but now faced with 25 fewer days, they're thinking about it, because GABs will start on schedule next August, early August, right?
It would.
Yeah.
You said that August 3rd does not provide adequate time. Does September 8th provide adequate time?
Yes, we believe that September 8th provides adequate time, just not for preparing our teachers for the professional learning that is required, but we're also thinking, and we just want to be very realistic, we need to be able to have a fully fleshed out plan around distance and digital learning if we have another school shutdown. So we would be really doing double duty. We would be learning the content that we normally learn in our pre-planning week. We will be preparing for digital learning, and then we will be preparing for a universal shutdown.
When students and their parent guardians make the big decision about what mode of instruction to do, is online learning only going to be an option?
Yes, that would be an option, yes.
You said not extending into June is a pro. Why is that a pro?
We traditionally end in May. Students prepare to go off to college. Students work in June, providing money for their families or providing money for themselves to get ready for college or their post-secondary options. So we thought that ending in May would be, well, not changing the end date would be a good option for our students. And also, ending in June changes the work calendar for our staff. And our staff, they are contracted based on the start date and the end date that we published earlier this year.
I am grateful for the work of the staff and task force, especially feedback session, but will there be consideration of the task force evolving to include those most impacted long-term, those on the ground, not all top-level administrators, teachers, special ed, bus drivers, parents? It has been clear the communication creates continued discourse. Why wouldn't it be considered? I've had many comments regarding special education, technology access, and I'm concerned about families. I'm concerned about communication to all families, not only those who have internet access. Are mail outs going out or phone calls being made? There was a question about an acronym. Was that GABS? Georgia Virtual School? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So right now, I believe that our task force, we've made our recommendations, and now the work is with those specialized groups, with our teachers, creating the framework for instruction, for our bus drivers, giving us feedback, for our school nutrition workers, giving us feedback of how the lunch line should be and how we feed our students that are in a digital environment. Those working groups are, I think, what is the next step of the work that we do. I think there's very little work that the task force has left to do. We've made our recommendations. In those recommendations, now it's time for us to work with our teachers, our staff, our families to actually tell us what will best meet their needs.
This next question is for you, Amy. Will not the public health department be more backed up once school's open? We talked about this. Will there be a hotline developed so that parents can report what family members of teachers and staff who are suspected of having COVID? How will confirmed and unconfirmed cases of COVID be treated differently, or will they? Good luck.
Some of those questions we don't quite have answers to yet, but I will try to answer them as best I can. It remains to be seen whether or not the public health department will be more backed up once school starts. One could imagine yes, but this is where I'm optimistic that our 23 school nurses we have on staff can assist in the process for our CCSD community, students, staff, and their families. We already have the Hillsman Health Center open and running right now as a service to Clark County School District, and I anticipate that our school nurses will be able to really assist with some of the public health component once we return. We have a meeting scheduled next week with our local epidemiologist, and I will ask them if we can develop some sort of hotline, either with our Human Resources Department or a direct line to DPH for contact tracing that could benefit Clark County School District community. What of family members and teachers and staff who are suspected of having COVID? That is outlined very clearly in the DPH DOE return to school guidance for K through 12. It would be considered a direct exposure, whether that exposure happens in our school building or whether it happens in the home of a staff member or a family member. We would be doing contact tracing for all of those pieces to make sure that we aren't sending an exposed person into our building, whether they're symptomatic or not, or whether they're positive tests or not, before it's safe to do so. How will confirmed and unconfirmed cases of COVID be treated differently, or will they? Again, that is clearly laid out, thank goodness, in the guidelines on page 3 in the district's decision tree. And yes, COVID and confirmed and unconfirmed cases, they will be triaged differently, but it doesn't so much depend on the confirmation. It depends more on they're using a symptom-based strategy instead of a testing-based strategy. That's a recommendation of the DPH and the CDC. So the guidelines ask for students to be out for 10 days with an additional 3 days of being symptom-free before they can return. And that is based on symptoms, not based on positive test results. But again, I'd be happy to answer more of those questions in depth when we can all look at the district's decision tree together.
I've got, Amy, if I can have just a couple of follow-up questions to that. One is what testing what test kits will our nurses have access to? Because I know there are a number of different types of tests.
You're muted.
I don't know the answer to that quite yet, Mr. Davis, but we are working on it. The Hillsman Health Center, currently the Athens Neighborhood Health Center providers have access to the PCR tests and the antibody tests. The PCR tests are the gold standard right now, and that's what's recommended for use. So it's likely that the school nurses will also have access to those tests.
Is that the one that goes all the way up? They say it brushes out your brain.
Well, I learned today in talking with some local medical authorities that there are different ways to sample that test. The nasopharyngeal sample is one of them, but there's also nasal swabs that are accepted in some circumstances.
Okay, and there's one additional question I've got in terms of, my understanding is not so much being able to collect the testing, but it's like getting it analyzed and getting the results back. Do you know if anything that the state's doing that's going to speed up that process? I've actually been talking to our legislators because I think we need to have a special legislative session on that. But anyway, have you heard of anything that's being done through community mental health on the state level to speed up the results?
I have not heard for certain that there are any actions in place, although I believe that they are trying. What was quite apparent last night is that public health is inundated right now, and the response times, the contact tracing times, and laboratory turnaround times are not what they would ideally be.
I think I got all the questions out of the chat. Dr. Gant and Dr. Dykeman have questions for you, Brennan.
Yes, ma'am.
I had a few follow-up questions. I think at our meeting maybe last week, you mentioned at some point that there would be testing for all of Clark County, I think staff. Am I remembering that at some point at the Hillsman testing site?
It will be available for staff. Amy, did you want to speak to that?
Well, currently any staff member, any CCSD student or their families can make an appointment at the Hillsman Health Center to have the COVID antibody testing. Because it's a wellness clinic, they're not doing the PCR test there right now, but they will schedule you at one of their other locations if that's the test that you are looking for, so you can still get it. The other piece of information is that the DPH testing sites do not require an appointment, so anybody can drive up to the site on Mitchell Bridge and receive a test the same day in a car line. And then I think what you're referring to, Dr. Gant, is that we are working with the Athens Neighborhood Health Center to set up like a Friday and Saturday CCSD
Yes.
to everyone drive up testing site where cars would pull in through probably the bus loop, Hillsman, and be able to pull through and receive a PCR test similar to how they're doing at other DPH sites right now.
Thank you. I also, when Dr. Gaskins, I know you mentioned in one of your the surveys earlier that I think it was 8% of the survey respondents said that they would not be able to provide childcare. I think it was with the September 8th start date. How will the district be addressing or reaching out to those particular families? I'm just guessing that it may even be more. And so any thoughts around that yet, or?
Dr. Gant, to be honest with you, I don't know if we have a solution. We are really talking to our principals. We talked to principals just earlier today about engaging their communities, about how we can support them in that. We do believe that the number is higher than 8%. We don't know if they will have childcare at home or not, with them not filling out the survey, of course. Right. Again, we want to work with our partners. Lawrence has done a great job already of trying to find which community partners can provide childcare for our families, and that is something that we're still working through. It is a huge concern of ours, especially at the elementary school level. We've seen schools, districts go back totally virtually, and we continue to worry about those K-2 students not being in school, but also their parents not being able to go to work if they're at home. It is a very, very real and complex problem, and we just don't have a solution for it just now.
I understand. The other question I have is, like, at what point do you anticipate, I know earlier Dr. Rourke talked about the 100 cases, was it?
Yes.
A certain amount of cases per 100,000 that was used to determine whether the city was in a red zone. I guess my question is, at what point do you all anticipate what will be used? Like what measure will be used to determine when or if the district has to go back to fully virtual learning?
To be, and I will turn this over to Amy in a second, but just to be totally transparent, we are ready to have that serious conversation with our principals tomorrow. We want to talk about total virtual instruction for our high schools. And if they feel like we need to start school totally virtual for our high schools. We've also talked about maybe totally virtual for our 8th grade students. And then we have an opportunity to spread our 6th and 7th grade students out. What Amy has done so well in informing us is that although our older students may not show symptoms, they spread COVID in the same way that adults do. She told us that yesterday. So that has really totally changed if we even think that a face-to-face option is an option for our secondary students as early as 7th or 8th grade. But Amy, I'm sorry, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I would say that that's a complicated and good question, and it needs to be asked to our DPH leaders across the state. The local community, the level of community spread is no longer being used. So that's the guidance we have received. There is not a zone that we will be in to tell us whether we should open up schools or not. That decision is being left up to individual districts to make under the guidelines of what to do when a student or staff member tests positive in your building. So you kind of have to zoom out and look at the big picture and go by this these guidelines they've given and say, are we going to be able to realistically shut down this classroom versus this building versus, you know, this select group of students. But the it may be, you know, every district is going to be left to decide, and it may be that here in Clark County, differentiated solution is best to meet the learning needs for all of our students. It's going to be very hard to prevent teenagers from intermingling and switching classes and exposing others in the hallways. That seems like logistically unsafe at this point to me.
Mm-hmm. And I only have 2 more questions. I'm sorry. I know you mentioned, Dr. Roark, like having been in collaboration with the Department of Health and Dr. Gaskins, just sort of really collaborating with those entities and institutions. To what degree might it be necessary at some point to collaborate with either our local government, for instance, if we need to branch outside of like school buildings or other buildings? And I don't even know if that is, if it's legal, but I guess I'm just sort of thinking, to what degree might we need to also be having these conversations with other local governing bodies in Athens?
I'm sorry, Dr. Gant, was that directed to me or I mean, I think that is something that we need to consider and do. I think the reason that we have collaborated with DPH so closely is that we were under the assumption, and I don't want to speak negatively, but they were going to be able to provide us a little more guidance than they have. That's why I think that we have really focused on that group, because in their initial guidance, we felt that they were going to be able to tell us if we were red, yellow, or green, and that would help us or inform our decision making. But now that we know that they have revised their guidance to tell us how to react to it, I think you are right in that sense that additional collaboration is warranted and needed.
I'll bypass my additional questions. I can circle back around.
Yes, ma'am. You're on mute, Dr. Maddox.
Can't hear you.
Sorry about that. The same line of question when it comes to technology. I'm focused on just specific things when I'm right now today. And with the technology, you know, in terms of collaboration and partnerships, that was one thing I had noted was, is it possible to partner with the mayor and commissioners to ensure that all families have technology? For me, that's one of my biggest concerns as these numbers are rising, and the fact that we may have to go to full online. I want to feel good that we will be able to service all families, and they will have the access and the equipment necessary so that all students will be able to be educated. So has that conversation ever taken place or been started between the mayor and commission and the district? I can see where that could be a possibility.
Amy wants to weigh in. Go ahead, Amy.
Well, I just will share with you that I invited myself to a seat at that table this week. I reached out to the mayor and offered to join him in the conversations that he's having with local and state leaders as a representative of the Clark County School District. And he responded immediately that he would very much appreciate that. And so he and I are going to be in collaboration on that front as well.
The other thing that I would mention, Dr. Maddox, is that we appreciate the board approving the K2 devices. So part of getting ready for school is that we have to have those devices in the hands of students, and hopefully those will come as soon as possible. There is a back order on Google Chromebooks, as you could imagine. The other thing that I will say, and Hope McGuire, our director of Title I, has ensured that we have hotspots that we can put in community locations. So the governor and his team did an assessment of every district and their connectivity. And so we are getting 8 community hotspots that we'll have to work with our community members to place those hotspots. It's as simple as installing them on a school bus, parking that school bus, and letting students in that housing unit or in that neighborhood take advantage of the free Wi-Fi that will be provided for them. And then as a district, we are purchasing additional hotspots for students. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we did not take up technology at the end of the summer because of our concerns about spread. So students still have devices. A concern of ours in pushing back the start of school is that we want to use 2 weeks leading up to school to have those students, if they need their devices repaired, to be able to bring those in and giving us enough time to either replace those devices or correct whatever the issue is.
One last question, with the technology, if we were to go all online, and I keep saying that because I know some teachers don't like to say distance learning, okay? But we go all online, then like the parapros and those types of students, those types of staff, will they still continue to, will they work virtually as well? Do they have devices?
So we just brought that conversation. I saw that Lynn Duke unmuted. We just had that conversation at Cabinet about putting in an order for all staff to work remotely. And to add to that, Dr. Maddox, this is a great time for our paraprofessionals to engage in additional professional learning. So we can provide online courses and classes to help develop their capacity and capability, as well as have them assist with making contact with students that may not be logging on. And of course, our teachers and our paraprofessionals always have the best relationships with students, so we want to utilize them in that way. Lynn, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
I think Kara has a question.
Go ahead, Dr. Dykeman.
Yeah, I have a few questions. I'm glad that you talked about how there may be different strategies for elementary schools, middle school students, and high school students, because I think that is becoming clearer that what we need for the older students and what we need for the younger students is really different. And I just want to speak a little bit to the elementary school students, because that's who I hear from most, the parents. And I think those are also the ones that they, in terms of childcare, need their students to go to school more than the high school students, because they can't stay home by themselves. And I also think that you know, based on everything that I've been reading and that recommendations that Lakeisha sent today from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, their recommendation is to prioritize in-person learning for K through 5 and also students with special needs. And I know that parents of elementary school students want to send their kids to school, but they are wanting to know that it's going to be a safer physical environment, of course, knowing that we're not going to be able to eliminate all risk. And what I've heard that people are doing is trying to come up with, you know, if they don't feel like it's safe for them to send their kids to school, they are forming like smaller groups of students to do online together and maybe trying to hire somebody. So, is there a way that we can do that in the schools or outside? The recommendations also said that the particularly high risk is prolonged close contact indoors. So one, I wondered if there is a way to move some stuff outside, if we can do anything with the space that we have outside, or also like other locations, parks, pavilions, community centers, things like that, where people can be outside. And then when you were just saying that it is possible that high schools might go all online, is it possible to use the high school buildings to spread out the other students, like elementary school and middle school students?
So you may have to repeat some of your questions for me as I go through them, but I will say our recommendation from the task force, and we have 3 elementary principals that are part of that task force, they are advocating for in-person instruction. We just feel very deeply, especially as a former elementary teacher and principal myself, that our younger kids need to be in school. It is very difficult to teach a student how to read. It is very difficult to form relationships with students through Google Classroom, Google Meet, Zoom. So we are advocating for in-person instruction for our students. On the other side of that is that we still want to make sure that we have all of these enhanced safety precautions in place, because although I believe that our students need to be in person and our parents want their kids to be in person, and we have several hundreds of teachers that are ready to go back to school. Lynn and I get emails from them every day. We still have concerns, and teachers still have concerns. Will it still be safe enough? What we want to do with our elementary leaders, Lindsay Chatham and Kina Worthy are leading that discussion with our elementary principals on Monday around how we really design an instructional framework for our elementary school that meets the needs of students and their families, as well as has some innovative options, as I think you alluded to in the second part of your question. I think in that instance, Dr. Dykeman, our teachers and our principals know their communities better than we know at the district office. So we would have to engage them around, there is a park that is close to our school. How can we engage, our local government about using that park? There is an organization at Howard B. Stroud that wants to make a dedication to that school. And Stacy Carson said, we need picnic tables. Don't buy us books, buy us picnic tables, because we need to distance for lunch and we need to distance for instruction. So I think our principals are already thinking about some of those innovative strategies that you mentioned. But to our earlier point, I think that those kind of decisions, it needs to be the decisions of the principals and the teachers making those recommendations to us that we would support. And I think you had a third question. I'm not sure if I answered that one.
It just came up. It's just around finding innovative spaces. And I think outdoors would be ideal. You might need tents or something like that. But then also, if it's the case that the high school students are going to be all online, if we could use the high school buildings to spread out.
Yes, ma'am.
The younger students as well.
We also want to entertain maybe using some of our middle school spaces as well. We just want to make transportation of course, transportation will drop those students off at, if it's a Clark Central or a BHL, but we just want to be mindful that those schools are still as accessible to parents as their elementary school. So we have entertained spreading our kids out at a wing at our high school, or if the numbers are low at our middle schools, having those students attend those middle school classes and using those spaces as well. Probably our largest concern are some of our elementary schools that have quite large populations, like Whitehead Road Elementary School, and then some of our schools that are a little smaller, meaning their classrooms are smaller, not their student population, and thinking about relocating those students as well.
Okay.
Mr. Worthy, do you have your hand up? We can't hear you. You're on mute, Mr. Worthy.
Are we?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Gaskin, I want to go back to child care because I sympathize with the parents that can't go to work because they don't have child care. But I want to remind the board, we dealt with a situation last year with the bus garage where a child care program had been started out there. I don't know what happened to that, but with this year, with the pandemic, I know what happened to it because they weren't there. But Mr. Gaskin mentioned a term that is very important: liability. Liability. So that's something that we have to consider. But I wanted to remind the board pertaining to the child care program that started at that was going on at the bus garage last school term. Now, the next thing I wanted to say, with spring break that's going to take place in April, I perceive that as a positive. And the reason that I say that because TAB, several years ago, they were pushing the district to start have spring break in April because obviously the weather, it's a possibility the weather is going to be better. So I just wanted to put that in. So I perceive that as a positive. Of course, we have different parents now that are participating in TAB, so they may be thinking different, but I wanted to bring that out. Thanks.
Dr. Knotts, I see the question that Mr. Stevens raised in the chat. Is that what you want me to?
That was one of them, but you can go ahead with that, I think.
Yeah, so Mr. Stevens just raised a question that other districts are doing a phased return over several months that start with all online, then moves to hybrid and finally in person. That model is being considered at our middle and our high schools. We are still trying to wrap our hands around starting elementary in a fully virtual environment. There are so many materials that students in an elementary setting need. They need manipulatives, they need their workbooks, they need to learn how to use their computers. It is not as easy to start all online for elementary, but that is definitely something that has come up with our secondary leaders, middle and high, and they will explore all of those options on Monday.
Okay. And then the other question I wanted to ask is, we've already heard some questions about the unbalanced school year with a truncated fall and a longer spring. Is there not any way to shift that so that the fall courses, whatever they might be, not necessarily AP, but just in general fall courses, get enough time, or don't get disproportionately penalized just because of the timing of this?
I'm sorry, I misinterpreted that question earlier today. When we say unbalanced semester, the semesters would both have the same number of days. We would split that in half, but the first semester would end in January and not when it normally ends in December. So for example, it would be, I think, 70, I think I have it on the calendar. It might be 78 days the first semester and then maybe 77 the second semester. So instead of the semester ending in December, it would end when students returned in January.
That's not what's on the calendar that's loaded into board docs.
Let me take a look at it. I'm sorry, that's an error. So I believe when we worked on our first draft, the time would, and I can have one of my team work on this now so you are aware of it. I think the time would end January 12th or 13th. I will email Dr. Ezekiel and he will let us know what that end semester would be. I apologize for that.
Okay, so instead of the 6689, you're saying it'll be like 77.
Yes, ma'am.
So the second last week or two of of fall semester will carry on after the Christmas holiday.
Yes.
Okay.
And so Dr. Ezekiel just emailed me, and the end date for the first semester would be January 15th.
Thank you. That's
You're
better.
welcome. Thank you for bringing that up.
Dr. Gaskins, as it relates to mental health, I know there's nothing final right now, and I know that the team, Dr. Thomas, you and the team are working extremely hard. If, like, in the event that high schoolers and middle schoolers are actually on a hybrid schedule or full distance learning, how are we addressing the mental health needs? Like, I really worry about students who have since March not been able to interact as they normally would with their peers. I mean, I worry about adults too, actually. But I guess I'm just wondering, how will students and their families go about receiving support? Let's just say, for instance, in crisis situations. I know that we have like the weekend on-call system where students are able to reach out and get counseling support. Will there need to be more money budgeted for that, or as it relates to more staff being available?
Something that we are working, our director of counseling is working with our director of social work around an SCL plan. I believe we are meeting tomorrow or sometime in the near future. One thing that we want to do is make sure that we have regular advisement lessons in person and virtual for our students. So making sure that we are checking in with those students to make sure that they are logging on. And when those students are not logging on, we immediately contact their family. It's a similar model of contact that we used in summer school. So those students were on Edgenuity, they were assigned a teacher, and we paid additional money for a counselor to make sure they were making regular contact with our students and with their families. It is very hard to do that in a virtual environment. I want to be transparent about that. I think we're going to have to use an additional lens to make sure that we are recognizing when students are disengaged, and it might be based on their mental illness. 2 classes that I am working into our professional learning is trauma-informed resilient schools and children of trauma and resiliency. Those are 2 courses that, and I'm just reading my notes, I can't remember what, they're free courses, but I want all of our staff and our school leaders to take those courses so we have an eagle eye on if there are any evidence that not only are our students suffering from mental illness or some struggles, but there may be a staff member that is suffering. And not that we would provide clinical counseling, because that's not what all of our staff is responsible for doing, but we would make sure that we alert our school social worker, our school counselor, our school administrator as soon as possible. It is very difficult in a virtual environment.
Yes, and I guess that's sort of a follow-up question with the school counselors and social workers and behavior specialists and
psychologists.
Do you feel that they are going to sort of have to shift, for instance, should things change to online, to be able to either build the capacity or be able to provide short-term counseling or what have you?
Yeah, I do. I think that their responsibilities are going to shift and more of providing mental health support and keeping our students engaged and progressing. And we're going to have to figure out how we still address all of the responsibilities that our counselors and student support staff still have. You know, I would love to say, yes, give us more money so we can hire more counselors and social workers and all of those. Those are very difficult jobs to find. I mean, we may have the money for the positions, but they're still really, really hard to fill. And even hiring someone new that our students don't know is still going to be difficult with connecting with them in a virtual environment.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to be sure that, you know, with the mental health needs, you know, I do know like a lot of that tends to fall on counselors and sometimes behavior specialists. And so, you know, really thinking through what might this mean for other support professionals, such as our social workers and people who have the education to be able to provide those services.
Mr. Fisher, there is a question in the chat around HVAC and airflow. He has a very confident answer for this. He shared this with us before.
Okay, so Dr. Yeager and Mr. Davis. So what we have done, and we started this the first of the summer, through every school that we have, to replace all our filters and put in what I call high-tech type filters that with any outside air that comes in, those filters catch any type of what I call pollutants that may come into the buildings. Also, we have cleaned all the coils at our school buildings to make sure that fresh air is also flowing through all our schools. Now, granted, we got some older schools within our district, but our HVAC technicians and our director have gone through those with a fine-tooth comb. We will continue to do that. If we do get closer face-to-face, then we will continue to run those systems to make sure that the airflow is fresh air is coming through all our buildings. Secondly, with the face masks, yesterday we received 15,000 face coverings from GEMA. They also sent us 20 thermometers that we've gotten. Also in the future, they're going to send us hand sanitizers, gowns if we need those, and also face shields. So that's free of charge, no cost to the district. So we'll be getting those items in. So all together right now as a district, we have probably close to over 50,000 face masks that we can give to our students and also to our staff. So we want to make sure that we do that. One thing I do also want to answer for you, Mr. Davis, we looked at several of our classrooms, look at can we social distance within our classroom with the seating. And what I asked our staff to do, I told them look at 8 feet spacing instead of 6 feet spacing. So again, and that will accommodate right now anywhere between 12 to 15 students based on our class size. And of course, if we're only gonna go, if we go face-to-face with our K through 6, and we're gonna spread out, that would be very helpful. That would help us out tremendously, where we can spread out and maybe even make the classes even smaller than the 12 or 15.
Thank you.
So before we go too far into the facilities, I have my hand, am I in order? My hand was raised. So quick question about before we leave the schools and the decisions about, you know, how to actually go back into our classrooms safely. I know that on Envision Athens, I've been participating in some of their weekly calls. And so this also is a subject that comes up frequently in terms of what's happening across the county, especially, Amy, with a lot of the things coming down from the Department of Health and how they're being disseminated out. My question is, are we really, I think we talked about rolling this out to the teachers. Did I hear the LSGTs as a part of that big community that needs to help make decisions for their local spaces? Because I think that's going to be very critical. If that's the group that is the governing entity for our different schools, then I would want to totally engage them to do that. And if we need to supplement those, I think I would love to know if we have some gaps there that we need to fill. And then my last question actually is the question. What did we learn from our staffing survey in terms of teachers' willingness to teach in person in the classroom? Thank you.
So, Ms. Davis, your first question around having our LSGTs a part of some of the decision-making and recommendations, that is included. We do want to engage our LSGTs at the school level. Dr. Thomas and Mr. Harris also want to have representatives of each of those LSGTs also engage at a level with Mr. Harris and Dr. Thomas, so we can also have LSGTs kind of bring up what some of the overarching needs are of the district. So I think you're right. Those LSGTs need to have input on their local schools, but we also need to know what are some trends that all schools are recommending or maybe grappling with that Dr. Thomas and Mr. Harris can help make some district-wide recommendations. And the other question, I think, is in Ms. Duke's space, so I'll let her answer that.
92% of our staff said that they are ready and willing to, and able, not willing, everybody wants to come back, but are able to come back. And that includes across all employee groups.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's encouraging. Actually, best news I've heard all day.
And I think a lot of the ones that were answering negatively come back, and as soon as they hear the plan of safety, they will feel more comfortable coming back. I got a lot of comments about that.
Super. Thank you.
I would like to follow up on that. So you said 93%, so that meant 7% would not. And was that how comprehensive a survey was that? Was that everyone in the district? Did you have a high response rate?
You're muted, Lynn.
You're muted, Lynn.
Sorry, I was flipping over. We had just under 1,200 that responded.
1,200. Okay. And then you said that once people hear the plan, the others will come. Does the plan include mandatory face masks or not?
It does.
It does. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, with social distance is not, if we're not doing social distance, then it needs to have mandatory face covering. Same thing on the bus. Once our students get on the bus, and we're gonna have 42 students, well, actually 48 students per bus, 2 to a seat, and again, mandatory face covering will be required. If a student does not have a face covering when they get to the bus stop, we will give them one as they get on the bus. Dr. Yeager, I guess I need to answer your question about airflowing from one classroom to another. I'm gonna have to do some research on that because I'm not sure about that. So let me do some research to find out. I will talk with our HVAC guys about that and try to get you an answer.
Mr. Fisher, just a quick follow-up question. A teacher from Clark Middle called me today and said she really thought that Clark Middle was better off with the independent units per classroom, even though you can't teach over them. Would that be correct?
I would have some concerns about the independent unit because you can't control the airflow. We could put filters in those independent units. I would prefer, just from a safety standpoint, we would need to have our 2 tons, our 5-ton units sitting on top that would have airflow through the whole building, more so than the individual units in some of our spaces. So that would be something that we're gonna have to really monitor really closely to make sure that we can continue to have fresh air going to those individual spaces.
Same thing at Cedar Shows, Mr. Fisher, we have individual units, and that's what we requested when we built the new building there.
Right.
Yeah.
So what you call those split units, split systems, and they you have one unit that control a particular building, another unit control another building. So again, we have to monitor those really closely to make sure that we continue to provide fresh air in those spaces.
I was going to chime in on the mask thing just to clarify that you've seen some of this business of the governor trying to tell counties and cities they cannot require masks in their own buildings, even under the terms of the order he put out yesterday. That does not apply to schools, so we can do what we need to do.
And then just for the confidence of some of our employees that work with special populations where their mouth needs to be visible, Mr. Fisher and his team has also ordered the face shields and plexiglass for classrooms as appropriate.
And while we're talking about cleaning, Mr. Gaskins, again, I'm looking upon this as a staffing issue. It seems like that if they're going to be asking more of our custodial staff in terms of cleaning areas, and again, I'm not just trying to throw money out, but I want to make sure that we have, even temporarily, all the staff that we need to do an effective job.
Well, we're trying to, right now we're about 20 positions down within our custodial staff. So we started interviewing some last week and also this week. One thing because this is a new normal, our cleaning is going to be totally different, Mr. Davis. For example, we should spend more time maybe sweeping halls and things of that nature. A lot of our cleaning is going to be now working with what I call hot spots within the building, what we call touch spots, where people may touch on a frequently basis, where we'll be going and taking care of those particular areas. Now, one thing that we did talk about, and of course that'll be part of our training when we meet with our teachers, if we do face-to-face and we do have transition between classrooms, we will provide sanitized wipes for our teachers to wipe the desk down before the students leave their classroom, or ask the students to do it before they leave, and put those in the trash. So when the next class come in, that area is already cleaned up. So it's going to be a team effort, not only with our custodian staff, but also with our teachers and other staff members in the building. Because as you know, there's no way possible that even if we hired 50 more custodians, we still couldn't do the type of cleaning that we need to do to make sure everybody is safe. So it's going to have to be a team effort in order for us to make this to be successful.
With the Mr. Fisher and I guess Dr. Gaskins, with the extra, I don't know if hazard is the right word, but it's sort of exposure and work that will occur for those that will be entering into the building, be it teachers, paraprofessionals, custodial staff, bus drivers, you name it. Those areas or people that have any underlying conditions. I guess I'm just thinking about our drivers. I'm thinking about all of them, but drivers, custodial staff, of the individuals I've worked with in Clark County. Sometimes there seems to be an elevated risk. Do you anticipate the district being able to care to the extent possible people with jobs to mitigate or decrease the risk? I know that's hard, right? Because if you're a driver, then that's a significant part of your job. If you're a custodial staff, that's a significant part of your job. But I really, worry about those individuals with, any, either underlying health conditions or also those that may also be a part of communities that have been heavily impacted by the pandemic.
Hard for me to answer that, Dr. Gant. The best thing that we can do, and what we have been trying to stress to our staff, is make sure that we provide the proper PPE for our staff: gloves, face covering, goggles, all those things that, if you look at the CDC guidelines, say that we be using if in our staff is cleaning or they're in close contact with people. So we're gonna do everything that we can do to make sure that we have everything that they need to try to keep them protected. And again, would it be 100%? No, and I would never guarantee that. But it's my job to make sure though that they have everything that they need in order to protect themselves. And that's, that's what I am committed to. And that's what our staff is committed to. And as a district, that's what we're committed to.
Dr. Dykeman, I saw your question in the comment around students being required to wear masks and around the 100% compliance or the concerns around the 100% compliance. That came up in our task force meeting. And that is one reason that we think that some of our older students may benefit from the virtual learning option. As Amy Rourke mentioned, our older kids, they may not get sick to the level that some adults do, but they pass the virus in the same way. So that is another, I think, piece of evidence that we may consider with going 100% virtual for our secondary schools.
I first just wanted to make sure that that masks would be required in classrooms, even if they are 6 to 8 feet apart. I know Mr. Fisher said definitely on buses when you can't social distance, but even if they can distance in a classroom, if they're all in the classroom together for the whole day, even if they're 8 feet apart, there's still a chance that they can pass to each other through the air. So I just wanted to make sure that that would be required in classrooms. And I know some people have talked about how it's not going to be possible for kids to wear a mask 100% of the time every day for the whole day. And I get that. And so I don't think that, I think teachers can use their judgment. I don't think they need to be punished or whatever. And I think that should be the exception. But going into it saying that it's something that's required.
Amy, did you want to respond to that?
Yep, Dr. Dykeman, it's not going to be a perfect system and there's going to be risks, but it is my recommendation that masks be mandatory for students and staff, regardless of the ability to social distance. There will be exceptions to that rule, of course, considerations to be taken into account, medical exceptions, everything that the district will evaluate on an individual case-by-case basis. But right now, the way that the numbers are trending in our area, the most responsible decision we can make for the district is to mandate masks for everyone. And
Dr. Dykeman, it's actually kind of ironic. Mr. Fisher and I, we were interviewed by some high school students just yesterday or the day before, and they asked that same question. And they said, we really want to encourage our classmates to wear masks. We just don't want them to be suspended or have some, bad consequence related to that. And our answer was that we would do our best to educate students around wearing masks. I think as we lead up to the first day of school and our jumpstart gearing up for school, we need to have videos about wearing masks and just really educating people in the benefit, not for just their own health, but the health of others.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I would like to be on that side of, in terms of it being punitive for them not wearing masks, the real risk is death or injury to someone else. And so I don't think we should definitely be too double-minded on this. If we're going to have the rule, I think we should definitely plan to enforce the rule. Not with necessarily something punitive, but we really do need to stress that this is not, it's not optional. It's, unless there's some extenuating circumstance. And I would think that we would want to be able to isolate those circumstances so that, again, everyone stays safe.
What I would, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm thinking of all the protests that I've seen in the last couple of months and all these young people. Now, granted, these were more college age, but they were all wearing masks and some of them were quite stylish. And so, you just kind of wonder if we can promote. I think your idea of doing a kind of a PR campaign around masks for our young people, maybe it could become cool. Not to use an old word, but I'm just wondering if maybe it can become catchy through a PR campaign.
See, Dr. Dyke, you asked about indoor athletics.
Yeah, before we leave the mask conversation, I guess, what about things like, I guess, and I can include in indoor athletics, things like PE or I don't know, anything like that. Will they be required doing things like that?
And I'll leave that to Mr. Gaskins, but it's just based on the schedule of the students. Of course, you know, again, we want to mitigate as much indoor stuff or kids getting together for basketball or for if they're doing indoor kickball and stuff like that. Those things I wouldn't recommend that we do. But again, like I said, as much stuff that we can do outside would be helpful. I think we need to keep in mind, you know, even in September, you know, temperature gets very hot. So especially with our elementary students. So if we are going to be doing teaching outside and those type of things, we just have to be mindful of the heat,
right?
That we'll be safe for our students if we're teaching outside. I'm not sure about doing anything inside right now.
What about stuff like, I know they had, like high school has had some of their sports start up, like volleyball. That's the only one I can think of right now that's inside. Are masks required there? What is the guidance on that?
Well, mainly they have just been doing what I call cardio exercise right now, and just pretty much running inside the gym. They have not been using a ball or anything right now. So I think they're supposed to start that up maybe next week. I can look into that, Dr. Diamond, and just see how that's going and see what the coaches are saying about that.
Okay.
Try to get you some information on that.
Okay.
Mr. Stevens, did you have any questions?
Yes, I've been hearing some of them get addressed, so I've just been listening in so far, but I'll butt in. One of the things, of course, I'm still concerned with is the equity aspect here, and also the health aspect, being a person with cystic fibrosis and also a person.
Uh-oh, we may have lost Mr. Stevens. At least I don't hear him anymore. Does anyone else hear him?
No, and I don't see him on here, or he kind of, okay.
I'll tell you when he comes back.
While we're waiting, I wanted to just clarify. I think Dr. Rourke and maybe Ms. Duke, you mentioned this either tonight or maybe a week ago, but like in the event that like a teacher or a custodian or anyone with sick leave, in the event that they are either exposed or they test positive, they would then use whatever that quarantine time that would be covered with their sick leave. Is that correct?
The federal law, the Emergency Act, has allocated 2 weeks of leave time for that. That is not their sick leave.
Oh, that is not. Okay, thank you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And there was some response to the staff letter that went out. It sounded, there was some confusion about whether it was paid leave or unpaid leave and what the explanations were. Anyone who gets exposed to COVID can take that leave. It doesn't have to be a childcare situation, right? There was some wording in the letter about childcare.
Right. There are two separate kind of provisions under that act. One is for exposure and quarantine, positive test or exposure. And then there's another separate part of it for childcare.
So if a teacher is sent home because one of his or her kids has tested positive, that 2 weeks is covered by the extra FFF.
Yeah, I think
the CARES Act.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's covered. Or if their child or parent gets sick and they need to take 2 weeks off, that's also covered, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mr. Stevens?
Oh, yes, sorry about that. Somebody was shooting fireworks and scared the crap
Can barely
out
hear
of me. But I'm back. What I was saying there is I'm still concerned about the equity aspect here and the health aspect, especially being that I have cystic fibrosis myself, and also I have a grandfather who's 75 years old and weighing whether to retire right now because of the seriousness of what's actually going on here in Athens, Clark County, where we're seeing numbers increasing by the day. Our hospitals now are reporting that they're full, and we have the COVID numbers sitting at well over 1,000 and increasing by the day. So that helps me reach the point that I would support that September date for reopening. But I would also be concerned that we need to keep that flexible. If we're approaching that September date and we're looking at numbers of, say, 3,000, 4,000 by then, are we going to revisit that and say, okay, online is the best option? Because we have a lot of people at risk here. So I'm worried about the liability there. Because I've seen it happening all across the country, and that's why most of the major school districts, I believe, from Atlanta to Los Angeles, are starting to support online options for the most part, because health-wise, we're in unprecedented times right now. I can't stress that enough, and it scares me to death having the type of disease that I do, because I mean, it's mentally, it's crazy. So I'm just worried about that aspect, and I really like to just see that plan is flexible moving forward, even if we do vote on a date tonight.
Mr. Stevens, I definitely appreciate your question and wholeheartedly agree with it. We want to be as flexible as possible. Ms. Rorick has done an amazing job of keeping Cabinet and the task force updated with those numbers. As soon as she gets information, we update our staff. As I mentioned before, we met with our principals on Monday and Tuesday for a retreat. And then Wednesday, those numbers change. So we're meeting with them tomorrow to give them those updated numbers. And with those continuous updates, as we feel that those numbers have elevated, that we need to go totally remote, we definitely will. We'll do that before September 8th. If we are in person after September 8th, we will do that as well. And I think that goes back to the additional planning that teachers need. In March, we had to turn on a dime to do that. And although I was very, very impressed with our students and our teachers and the quality of instruction that our teachers provided our students, we just want to be in a better position to make sure that that instruction is top notch. So we just need some additional time to plan that, because you are exactly right. That is a realistic issue that we may run into, and we want to plan for it sooner rather than later.
Dr. Gaskins, I can't, I really personally appreciate you and your team, Dr. Rourke, and really everyone that's here, Mr. Harris, Mr. Griner, Dr. Hill, Mr. Fisher, because I know that, I know when we call for this meeting, that we would not have all the answers, and that certainly didn't expect you all to have all of the answers, particularly because it's ever evolving. But I just wanted to, reiterate my thank you for what you've provided so far, as well as, your willingness and your just openness, the whole team, to really field questions, take questions, answer questions, and try to get us information as quickly. And Mr. Pruitt, I can't even imagine what you've been doing on the back end with getting those questions in for special. Are there any other questions or discussion points before we move forward with our next item on the agenda, which is to take action on the proposed calendar? Dr. Yeager?
Is the proposed calendar we're going to vote on going to be updated with the correction for the unbalanced semesters?
Yes, so we will add the end date for our first semester will be January 15th.
Okay, thank you. And then I've been emailing with Mr. Gaskins, and I don't know if you all saw it, but with the move of spring break to April, so now that doesn't align with UGA spring break, which is, if that's the best thing to do, then that's the best thing to do. But there were also 2 days in March, the 4th and 5th, I think, that are still marked as days that the students have off. And so I just wondered if it didn't make any difference, if those could be moved to the following week. So at least those 2 days aligned with the UGA spring break. Does that make sense?
I guess my only concern would be, I guess this is you all's decision, but I guess and be quiet. That wasn't even a question for me. Dr. Gaskins, I think that was for you.
Well, Dr. Gant, with all respect, I think that might be a question for the consensus of the board, or maybe Mike may need to weigh in. I think that we can make that revision if that is the consensus of the board. I just would defer to Mike around protocol. Because we are presenting this calendar, I don't know if we would need to make a amendment to our proposed calendar, or what the protocol would be for that. Just to give you a little background, March 5th was an original day off for students, and so that's why we added it to the 4th. So I hope I said that right. The 5th was original day off for students, and then we added the 4th. But we could, if that is the will of the board, move those 2 days to the following week, which would be the 11th and the 12th.
And just to give some context of why I thought that might be a good idea, it doesn't have anything to do with, I mean, I do think it's helpful for parents who work at UGA, but that wasn't actually the reason. It had more to do with the students who are dual enrolled at UGA would then miss fewer classes on either spring break, or also if we have student teachers in the spring, and then also if we have ASP in the spring, which we may or may not have with UGA students. And then any other kind of partnerships. It's also Athens Tech spring break and also Piedmont spring break.
Do you need is that a friendly amendment, Kara? Do you need a second? Mike?
Waiting for Mike to say if we have to advertise that again.
Yeah, the agenda already been amended. I'm sorry, already been adopted.
No, the calendar.
No, I'm not saying that. She's the question that Mr. Gaskin asked a few minutes ago in terms of shifting those days. I can't recall what I think he said, the 5th and the 12th. And I'm saying in order to do that, following Robert's Rules of Order, the agenda already been adopted.
But it's the same action. It would just be it would be whatever was recommended as the calendar.
No, the calendar that we're going to vote on tonight, whether we're going to start school on the 3rd, the 17th of August, or the 8th of September. Mike, you want to address that?
So yeah, I think so the board just has to approve the calendar.
Yes.
If you want to, if the administration is willing to change its recommendation and the board wants to change those dates tonight, that's fine. If the board wants to adopt a motion that approves the calendar, giving the administration some defined discretion to change those dates after it looks at the issue further, that's fine too. You just need to either, you need to approve something concrete, and if you give discretion, you need to define exactly what that discretion is.
I think maybe given discretion to the staff to look at that, but that's one of 9 here, and I wouldn't be the one making the motion, but.
So I'll make the motion that we approve the calendar, giving the staff discretion to change the dates in March as necessary to accommodate the greater need.
Is Mr. Gaskin recommending that?
He has, excuse me, I'm sorry.
I'm asking whether Mr. Gaskin is recommending what you said in your motion.
Okay.
Mike, do I need to recommend that?
Well, yes, I guess technically recommended, or at least indicate that you can work within those parameters, sure.
Yes, so we can work within those parameters.
Thank you.
And if I'm not mistaken, that still gives Mr. Gaskins and Dr. Thomas and team discretion. Am I hearing that correctly?
That was my motion.
Okay.
Should we include in that discretion for some of the other holidays in case things go haywire and they need to be able to change? I mean,
hold on a second here. We got a motion on the floor and you keep discussing. Got to get a second to it.
we have a second.
There
I
was
already
a second.
seconded it.
I didn't hear it.
There's
There was a second.
Okay.
If I might, what the administration just needs to do is get your approval so it can publish a calendar. You'll be having lots of meetings as the weeks and months roll on, and you could approve further adjustments there.
That's true.
Okay.
Okay.
If I understand correctly, what we're voting on is the start of some type of school. And we've got a number of days of instruction as part of that motion as well. And we've got the skeleton of a calendar. And that's what I see us approving.
Okay. All right. Well, we have a motion and a second to approve the calendar with Dr. Thomas, Dr. Gaskins, and team discretion to make those modifications as they see, if they see fit, or as they see fit. Dr. Gaskins, if you would, I don't see any more hands up on my screen, but Dr. Gaskins, would you take roll for all in favor?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
No.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Dr. Yeager?
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman?
Yes.
Mr. Worthy?
Yes.
Dr. Gant?
Yes.
Dr. Knox?
Yes.
And Dr. Maddox?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So that motion passed. Dr. Gaskins, I think 8-1. Is that correct?
That is correct, Dr. Gant.
Okay. We will move forward with our item 5, which is adjournment. Open the floor for a motion.
Linda.
I move that we
I
adjourn.
move that we adjourn.
Okay, so Ms. Davis and Mr. Worthy, I think that was.
You can't have a double emotion. I'll let Linda have it, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing that I don't see any objections, we are adjourned at 9:11 p.m.
Stay safe.